So thank you. I am Sheena Becker. I am a lead microbiologist at Corteva Agriscience, the agriculture division of Dow DuPont. And until a couple weeks ago, we were known as just Dow Agrisciences. And I want to take a moment to be one of the many people who have stood up here and thanked Nigel for letting me be a part of all the diversity talks over the last few days, and they've been really wonderful talks. And I hope that I can give you some effective solutions for diversity and inclusion. So to start with, we need to recognize that we have a need for diversity. Other than it's just the right thing to do, why should businesses really care about diversity? And I will apologize because here I will talk specifically about gender and race. Because of affirmative action, we do have actual metrics around this. But McKinsey & Company, which is a global management consulting firm, basically their job is to tell companies how to succeed. They did a study of more than 366 companies, and they published this in 2015, and they found that of the companies that were in the top quartile for gender diversity, they were 15% more likely to perform above the average, and those that were in the top quartile for ethnic diversity were 35% more likely to perform above the average. When you look at leadership, for every 10% gain in gender or race that you saw in the leadership, that equated to a 3.5% or 0.8%, respectively, increase in EBIT for the company. Now, last year, they actually published a broader study on this, where they looked at more than 1,000 companies across 12 countries, and these numbers really haven't changed much. They're still the same. They still see that diversity is important. And why? Well, multiple studies have shown that if you have diversity, diverse groups can solve problems better, faster, they have more creative solutions, they're more willing to take risks, and they feel happier in their jobs. So companies perform better. You also have less turnover of people. So we know that diversity is important, but how do we get there? How do we work on diversity? So Jesse Q from Ginkgo Bioworks presented this at SIMB's annual meeting last year. And Ginkgo is a startup company in Boston, and they had hovered around 27% women up until late 2015, at which point that number dropped to 23%. So they began to actively work on this and say, what can we do to increase our gender diversity and also our other diversity? So one of the things that they did is they looked at the colleges that they recruit from. And they found that most of the colleges that they could recruit from, being a startup, were local colleges, but they were mostly They had a high number of graduates who were white male. So they began to look at other colleges. They may be tailored towards women or historically black universities, and they began to recruit from there. They also began to look at their job postings to make sure that they were neutral. And you may say, okay, aren't all job postings neutral? But a lot of times when we post a job, we put a large number of requirements for that job, when really we may need just a smaller list. And studies have found that when women look at a list of requirements that they need, and they say, okay, I'm qualified for 7 out of 10 of these requirements, so I won't apply for the job. But men will look at the requirements and say, oh, I'm qualified for 7 out of 10 of these requirements, I'll apply for the job. So they begin to kind of pare that down and think, let's put stuff into our job listings that actually fit what we need for this job. And then they begin to look at how they host their interviews. They say, we won't host an interview unless we have a diverse panel. So unless we can get women and different ethnicities to our interview, we won't have the interview. And it wasn't to say that they said, all right, we're going to hire 5 women, or we're going to hire 5 African Americans. No, they just said, let's get them to the table, and we will hire the best candidate. They also begin to look at other things that they do. As a startup company, they generally go out after work and have beers or have drinks. And a lot of work happens at that table. But what if you have a family that you want to go home to at night? What if you don't drink for personal or religious reasons? Then you're not at that table and you're not part of those discussions. So how can you start to have an environment where everybody can be part of those discussions? So they went out, they had breakfast, brunches, lunches. They started having diverse ways to engage people. And within a year of this active work, they increased their gender diversity to 37.5%. Their next target, and they actively admit this, is that they need to work on their ethnic diversity. But these are continuous efforts. All right, so we know that diversity is important, and we have ways to work on it. But Sam Marshall from AT&T is famous for saying that diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance. So how do we get people to feel like they have an environment where they can dance? So I'm going to talk about myself a little bit, just because there's no IP around that, so it makes it really easy. But this is my sphere of knowledge for science. And this is me in 8th grade at my first science fair, where I researched how iodine works on E. coli. And so I worked with E. coli for a couple of years before I went to the University of Louisville Brown Cancer Center, where I studied how estrogen mimics bind to the estrogen receptor alpha as expressed in a yeast expression system. Concurrently to that, because this is all during high school, I went to Indiana University Bloomington, where I participated in 2 summer programs, where I did research looking at how TOC3 binds to p53, which is one of the genes that causes cancer cells to commit suicide. I was there for 2 summers before I started my freshman year in college. My freshman year in college at Indiana University, I was part of a new program that they had called Integrated Freshman Learning Experience. So instead of sitting in a classroom and learning biology for 2 semesters, I got to be in a lab learning biology for 2 semesters. And it was split into 3 sections. So the first section was protein. So we had our own protein purification columns. We isolated an unknown protein, digested it, and ran it through MALDI-TOF to identify it. The second part of the class was genetics. So we got to design our own genetic screen and then test our own DNA and that of our classmates to see whether or not we possess that gene. The last part was neuroscience, where we put electrodes into the brains of rats and had them do various activities and saw how their hippocampus responded to those activities. I then got contracted in at Eli Lilly for a summer, where I did RNA work and RT-PCR. At the end of the summer, they asked me if I could stay on. I was like, well, I still have 2 years left of college, so I'll need to finish that. But I have Thursdays off, so I'll come up and work on Thursdays. So I continued to work there throughout the school year, and the next summer they asked me if I wanted to go to a different location to work with C. elegans. I was like, yeah, sure. So I went there, I developed their C. elegans lab, or did a lot of work to develop that, and actually worked on cell sorting of the C. elegans. And then I finally graduated college, and then I went to work at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, in their Center for Medical Genomics, where I did allelotyping, microarray, and genotyping. And I really became the person in the lab who could fill in for everyone. I cross-trained for every position in the lab. And I got a really extensive knowledge of science. And then 7 years ago, Nigel interviewed me and hired me at Dow Agriscience to work on natural product development on a new project. I worked on that project for a couple of years before I got moved into the systems biology group, where they really needed somebody to take some protocols and develop them for systems that hadn't really been developed for yet. How do we get good DNA, RNA, proteins out of these systems so that we can run our systems biology? I was part of that group for a couple of years, and then I moved into our high throughput group, which is where I am now. And I've become the person who really runs like rock turning experiments, anything that we can't figure out, or we're just like, hey, what happens if we do this? That's what I do. So I would say that I've had a very broad breadth of knowledge for science, and well over 12 different leaders, multiple different people that I've worked with. And all of these have really contributed to my sphere of knowledge for science. And they've made me a better scientist. And these are all augmented by journal articles, by conferences, networking, and classes and workshops. And I think this is what we all do, right? We all try to take any opportunity we can to become better at the science. But what about our sphere of knowledge for people? So when I look at, this is us, and specifically this one's me, but I grew up in a small town in southern Indiana where there's, people tend to think very much alike. I go to church with people who have the same religious beliefs as me. I have friends who like to watch the same movies and listen to the same music. And I have family who teach me everything that I know. And I go to a local college. And I have coworkers who, again, maybe local, who have similar beliefs to me. And then there are the people who are not us. And they kind of make us uncomfortable because they're kind of outside of our comfort zone and where we really want to be. And we make excuses not to hang out with the people who are not us. Like, oh, maybe we just don't have the same interests, or I don't like the music, or I don't like to rock climb. That's what Nigel tells me all the time. But we just don't hang out with them. And we make reasons. And it's not that they're bad people or we're bad people. It's just that we like to be in our comfort zone. And we don't have something that tethers us to them. We don't have that affinity. Now, iPhone has made a great case for this, because if you see somebody with an iPhone, you kind of give them the nod like, yeah, we're part of the same club. But how do we go beyond that? And why do we work so hard to expand our sphere of knowledge for science, but we don't work to expand our sphere of knowledge for people? And it's not that we don't have the opportunity, because if I look back at my science experience over the many years, I've met people who are Russian and Chinese and Romanian and Indian, and that list goes on and on. But people have different educational backgrounds who are part of the LGBTQ community. I have met people who have Asperger's, depression, who like to dance ballet to death metal, and I taught them to crochet. And really, taking the time to get to know those people helps to expand that sphere of knowledge, what we're comfortable with, where we're happy, where we can actually reach out to somebody and be like, okay, we have something in common that we can talk about. You can think of this in a different way, because everyone here knows the scientific method. It is the base of what we do, and it starts with a question. We want to know an answer, and then we do our research. We use our base knowledge, because we've been doing science for over 17 years, and we go to conferences, and we talk to subject matter experts, and we read journal articles, and based on all of that breadth of knowledge, we develop a hypothesis, and then we come up with an experiment to test that hypothesis. We gather our data and results and draw our conclusions, which based on last night's talk, are probably wrong. But we still do it, right? But when it comes to people, we use our base knowledge, and it ends there. We don't take the time to get to know them. We don't take the time to get their perspective or learn about them. And I get it, it's difficult. We're all very busy. But if you can take the time to get to know each other and have a small connection, it'll mean a lot more. You'll be more comfortable talking to them about other things, and they will be more comfortable talking to you. So I would challenge you to start treating your personal interactions like you would a scientific question, and expand your sphere of knowledge. And many of you may say, oh, well, I'm not good in social situations. Those make me uncomfortable. I'm one of those people. But there are other ways to learn about other perspectives, and you can learn from movies. Watch movies even that aren't necessarily movies that you would choose. Sitcoms are designed to do this. They're designed to get you to feel an affinity, feel like you could be one of those characters, or you like one of the characters, you want them to be happy, and then they put them through a whole test of different things, and that's what good sitcoms do. TV does this. Books do this. And if you think I'm wrong, the Journal for Applied Social Psychology actually published an article called The Greatest Magic of Harry Potter, Reducing Prejudice. This was republished by Scientific American. And what this study did was, this was in Europe, and it's rather a small study, but it had really strong effects, or showed really strong effects. They looked at 35 elementary school kids, and they measured how they feel about how they tolerate immigrants. And then they took the kids and they split them into two groups. And one group was read, over the course of 8 weeks, they were read innocuous portions of Harry Potter, where nothing really important happened, just general magic school stuff. The other section was read portions of Harry Potter where marginalized groups experienced prejudice. So for example, when Draco Malfoy calls Hermione a mudblood, for those of you who don't know Harry Potter, that's a really bad thing. So they went on through this for 8 weeks, and at the end of the 8 weeks, they measured how the kids felt about immigrants. And those who had been read the prejudice sections of Harry Potter were much more tolerant to immigrants. They continued this study in middle school and high school kids, and found that these numbers pretty much held true. When they got to college kids, they didn't. And the theory that they have, or posed, was that college kids don't feel like they could be Harry or his friends. So they don't necessarily feel an affinity to the main character, and therefore they didn't experience the same feelings when the characters went through these prejudiced events. A study in science also showed that reading literary fiction improved the theory of the mind, which they define as the human capacity to comprehend that other people hold beliefs and desires, and that these may differ from one's own beliefs and desires. That's empathy, and that's the core of what inclusion is. To believe that other people have different views than you, and that's okay. So now how we our sphere of knowledge. An active thing that we can do to promote each other is the shine theory. So during Barack Obama's first presidency, he had a few female aides, most were men, and the few female aides found that they weren't really getting their voices heard. What happened was they would voice an opinion and they would get talked over. And frankly, that's not just male or female, that happens to all of us every now and then. But it's kind of frustrating. So they devised a plan with mics. So they devised a plan to combat this. And they stole or borrowed a theory from Ann Friedman, who is a podcaster, who posed the shine theory. The shine theory is if you don't shine, I don't shine, or the idea that success breeds success. So what they did is, as they were sitting at the table and one woman said, oh yeah, I think we should do this, and they got talked over, another woman would raise her hand and say, I think Sarah's right, that's a great idea, and we should do this. So they would call out the person and they would raise them up and support their ideas. And by the start of Barack Obama's second term, he had gender parity in his aides because he felt like they were getting their voices heard and they were being effective. Another way to think about this is through enthusiasm. So this is enthusiasm from the I Am Elemental series. For those who don't know, somebody who got tired of there only being male action figures created their own Kickstarter to get female action figures. And there's a set, the initial set has 6 different superheroes, but this is enthusiasm. Enthusiasm shares her excitement and happiness with others, but her superpower is to banish the negative emotions of others. And what that can do for the people you work with, when you raise them up, when you compliment them, when you say, hey, this is a great idea, or you're just excited about what they're doing, can be very powerful in everything that you do. And the positive atmosphere that makes at work is something that infects everything that you do. And it makes just for a happy work environment. And it makes people feel included. So now we know why diversity is important, how to get there. We know how to kind of expand our sphere of knowledge. The next thing that we need is businesses to support this, right? We need to feel like our companies support us doing this and taking a step back from the science to get to know people. So how can you do this? How can businesses do this? Well, first of all, we have to stop thinking of this as a race. So often we want to set metrics at the beginning of the year, and we want to say, okay, I'm going to accomplish this for diversity and inclusion. Just so at the end of the year, we can check off a box and say, we're done. But diversity and inclusion isn't a box you can check off. It's not something that we're going to get to the end of, because people will change and evolve. And situations will always come up, and there will always be opportunity to get to know more about people. And the best case that I know of for this was given to me by my children. So these are my children, Caitlin and Zachary. And I personally think I'm a strong woman. I grew up horseback riding and camping, and I like to sword fight and rock climb, and you name it, I enjoy doing it. And I generally have picked movies or shows that have strong female characters for my daughter to watch because I know the importance of her seeing those. So one day, we go to a friend's house, and they have 2 older daughters, and the older daughters want to paint fingernails. And my daughter's really excited to paint fingernails. And my son is really excited to paint fingernails. And my husband says, no, you can't paint his fingernails, he's a boy. And I looked at him and I was like, no, I would never tell Caitlin she can't do something because she's a girl. I won't tell Zachary he can't do something because he's a boy. Because frankly, all the other kids were girls and they all wanted to paint fingernails. And he just wants to be included, right? So I'm feeling pretty good about myself. I'm like, yeah, I've got this gender equality thing down. But then the girls ask my daughter if she wants to pick out a movie. And she picks Sleeping Beauty because we've never seen it. And we've never seen it because it doesn't fall on my list of movies with strong female characters. So here we are sitting watching Sleeping Beauty, and I will never forget the look on my son's face as Prince Charming strolls onto the screen, and his jaw drops in awe and admiration. Because in my family, we watch movies with strong female characters, and he hadn't seen the strong male characters. So I would challenge you to think that this is not a race. This is something we continually have to work on. And now we watch strong male characters also in my family. And we have to learn from that. Fast Company published an article, how these top companies are getting inclusion right, and they call out employee resource groups. So this is something that we can continue to do, and many companies have these. And there's been a debate lately as to how important they are. But the best case that I've been told or were explained to me is the importance of employee resource groups is, these are a place for people to come together who may face the same challenges as you and understand those challenges. So if you are from a company where you need a visa and you're going through challenges on how to get your visa, you need those people to help you work through those challenges who have had those experiences. But also, you have to think about these as opportunities to get to know each other, to get to know other people who are outside of your comfort zone. And you need to engage in these, even if you're not part of that group. So these are all the employee resource groups of Dow. We have a Women's Innovation Network, African American Network, it goes on and on. I'm part of our Women's Innovation Network and the African American Network because I want to get to know about that and their challenges. But one of the challenges we find is we can't get men to our meetings for the Women's Innovation Network. And there's nothing like standing in a room full of women being like, yeah, women need equal rights, and not having men there to hear it. So we need people to be there. Go, engage, be a part of it. One of the other things that you can do is just to, as businesses, is to give an opportunity for people to get to know each other. That's outside of science. Take a step back. Google found it very effective to have community gardens because it brings leaders and employees to one level where they can work together on something that supports the community. And Dow actually has done the same thing. We have an entire group in my department who goes and works on these community gardens together. And last year, they donated 15,000 pounds of fresh vegetables to a local food bank. So this is my team at Dow, the high throughput team that I work on. And I've used this picture with all of their permission. But I promise you that these are effective solutions. So why do I think that these are effective solutions? So I announced that I'm from Corteva. That name is relatively new. At the end of 2015, Dow Chemical, which is the parent company of Dow Agrisciences, and DuPont announced that they would merge. And we all got scared because we don't like change. Humans don't like change. And we kind of felt uncertain. And I set it as one of my goals to not lose anyone from my team because we are a great team. And so I began to engage in a lot of these activities and put more time towards that. And we spent time doing ergo walks where we talked about safety and career paths and life and anything that came up. I invited people to talk to me and to talk to each other. And we really worked to make this an inclusive environment. And I knew it worked because, like I said, I'm the rock turner in our group. I do all the random experiments. And when they announced the merger, I said, OK, I'm going to start pulling all these other people in my group in to do my random experiments too, because I want to make sure that they feel comfortable enough that if something happens and they lose their job, because mergers happen and that kind of stuff happens, and it's a fear, that they feel comfortable, like they have a good resume, and they have more experience than what they've had before, so that they can easily find another job. So I began to pull them in. And I knew that our diversity and inclusion efforts had worked when one day I walked up to one of them and I said, hey, I'm going to go do this random experiment. Do you want to come? And she said, no, I'm not interested in that. And at first I was taken aback, like, what? What do you mean you don't want to be a part of this? Because I think it's cool. But then I realized that she's free to think however she wants. It's not something she's interested in. And that we finally had an inclusive environment where she felt safe enough to say no and not feel like that was going to compromise her career. And then continue doing what actually did interest her. So I would encourage you to take these back. And I'm free for any questions afterwards. But all these efforts do make a difference. And we continue to grow, and we continue to work on more things. But I think that these have been good solutions for diversity and inclusion. I think hopefully we'll see more in the future. I don't know if there are any questions.